Now I'm starting from where we pretty much left off. Oh, you may be a little confused, but what I when I'm doing coding, I use Java's logging facility. So I've configured my editor so that it writes this. You can just ignore that, but I didn't want to undo that because it's a NetBeans wide thing. Okay, so we are going to first define our class called pet. Maybe let me put the UML over here so we have a. Okay, so pet had a string that was its name, a string, its type, and then something called a toString method. Okay, so I have, and then actually in addition to that, I'm actually going to put the setters and getters, and I'll show you how that's done. But again, everything is in a named package. So here's my package. I'll put it in here, CS2173. There are a couple ways to do it. My favorite is to right-click on the package and say New Java class. And then it brings up like a little what used to be called wizard. And then I just say what it's called. I verify that it's in the location that I want, in the package that I want. And this actually tells me exactly where that file is. Notice that Java source code files have the extension .java. Okay, so I finish, and then now in yours it may look a little bit different. There'll be some stuff at the top. Again, you can edit this template for your classes to kind of do stuff that you want. But okay, right now just sort of an empty class pretty much. Say what I'm gonna delete this just because we're not going to really need it. All right, so the first thing is now we actually kind of work our way down the UML class diagram. The next thing is to define our instance variables, and in this case, okay, one is called name, and again, all instance variables must be private. Coming from a scripting language that doesn't have the concept of private or public or anything like that, it is going to be natural for you to leave that off, to forget that. But if you don't catch that, it's going to be ding, because anything other than a private instance variable is going to be a state of sin here. Okay? And this came directly from the UML class diagram. Okay, now the next thing that we need to do, and this isn't in the class diagram, but is create a constructor. And you're familiar with the concept of a constructor, right? That exists. Now here, if I create one of these pets, I need to tell it. Now in this particular case, I need to tell it what its name is and what its type is. And for these purposes, we're not going to allow ourselves to change that. And so now if you're careful, you can. Okay, so if you're careful, you can use the same name as the instance variable when you're passing an argument into the constructor. But again, notice we have to say exactly what type it is. It's, we can't get away from that. But notice that the instance variable name is in green, but the argument is in black. And that indicates that they're actually, even though they have the same name, they're actually two different things. So the way to set those, in this case, is to use the keyword this. And this construct actually is a little bit of a Python kind of enforces something like this, although they actually have a better named thing called self. I like that. I like the word self. That's one of the few things I like Python better about. But what this says is this name is the name that's been passed in. This dot name refers to the instance variable, and you see the color helps you identify that. Okay, so we're going to be very loosey-goosey. We can just define any type of, our types can be a unicorn or a cat or a dog or a turtle or, whatever we want. We're being very open about that. Okay? Now, the thing is, for something like this, we let's just we defined our stuff here. So let's define the toString. So here's how we define a method. We instance methods are typically public, but they could be other things. I think for almost all the ones we will have in this class, they'll be public, but they can be public, private, whatever. I would avoid the package one, but that's okay. So now what this, and again, this is something that you've used in your other languages. So although scripting languages tend to be more loose about this, Java is very anal. So what this says is that this method toString must return a string. It can't return anything else. In scripting languages, they tend to be more loose about that. They don't even say what it's going to return. So it's going to either return something or not return something as you see fit. Now, notice we have a red squiggly here. And in fact, if you hover on either this little light bulb thing or, let's see, it's not doing it here, but if we hover on this is whenever you see the little light bulb with a red on it, and you hover on it, it'll tell you, notice the pop-up, I can't make it bigger, it says missing return statement. So it's expecting a string to be returned, and we haven't done that. All right, so now what kind of, well, the word is return. Okay, and what I'm going to return is I'm going to return the name of the thing and what it is. Now I see these little light bulbs can be very helpful. This I will ignore that, but this says add an override notation. So I'm going to do that. Why? Because toString is a method which is actually defined in the granddaddy superclass of all, and this is confusing. The granddaddy class of all classes is a class that's called object. Terrible name, but that's just what it is. And in that, okay, now what is the purpose of this toString thing? Well, let's see. I'll show you, and it should be obvious from that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to test my pet by showing you how to instantiate one. Okay, so first I define here. What does this do? This defines a variable of type pet. Okay, so now let's say I try, one of the things you can actually do to all objects is to just sort of print them, but lo and behold, look, it says, it gives me, this is the red squiggly of death. Why? Because if I try to run it, I can try to run it, but error. What's the error? Variable pet might not have been initialized. Remember we said that variables are initialized to their default values, except when they're local variables. Okay, so remember I said scope? So what's the scope of the variable pet? Is this method called main. Why? Because it's within the curly braces. So pet exists within the curly braces, and because it's defined there, and it's not an instance variable, it's a local variable, and so it must be initialized. Okay, so to get rid of this red squiggly, we have to say pet is equal to new pet. Okay, now notice that lowercase pet and uppercase pet are two different things. Uppercase pet is a class, lowercase pet is an object. Now, does using the same name but upper and lowercase, is that too confusing? I mean, I can use different names. I can call this variable anything I want, but this I can't, because this is a class. I'm kind of stuck with that.
Okay, so testpet.java is a Java class. Main class.
Yes.
Main class.
Yeah, it's a main class. So, and if you accidentally just create a class without making it a main class, then you can actually just type this in.
So
Type
the
in
other,
pub.
The other stuff that you were doing, is it in the same file, or is it a...
No, yeah. Now in Java, one class per file. Right. So unlike what you may be used to in other languages, and scripting languages tend to throw everything into one file. Java is the exact opposite. Now in Java, you can put more than one stuff into a file, but that is discouraged, and that will be, with a few exceptions we'll run into later on, will not be allowed. Okay, so one class per file. All right, now we're still getting red squigglies here. So, okay, so here my first attempt is to just kind of instantiate one, and I use the word new, but I'm getting a complaint. It says the constructor pet in class pet cannot be applied to given types. It requires a string, but it found no arguments. Okay, so it said that the constructor, which I defined over here, requires me to give it two strings, and I'm giving it nothing. So it's complaining. So why don't you give me a name? What shall I call my pet? Fluffy. Okay, and what type is Fluffy? Pitbull. Okay, so we have Fluffy the Pitbull. All right, so now notice that now, okay, first of all, no red squiggly here. Why? Because it wanted two strings. I gave it two strings. And now when I print it, that red squiggly went away because I've now initialized it. So now what am I going to get if I run this? Okay, so now can you deduce what happened when I just printed this object? So how did it know to do this? Remember this toString method that we wrote? Okay, what toString does is toString is a method that takes an object and turns it into a string. Now, let me show you something. If I don't define this, okay, so I just commented out my toString, and I run this, then I basically get gobbledygook. What the Java Virtual Machine does is it gives me, it defines remember I said toString is defined in that Granddaddy class object? Well, the toString it does gives me the name of my class and then some gobbledygook. And if you're used to C programming, you might think that that's something like an address in the machine, and it's not. It's just gobbledygook. Okay, so what happens is when you print an object, what it does is it finds the toString for that object, and it executes it. So remember we were talking about kind of this upcasting thing? So now what happened was it went to find the toString method of pet. And because I commented out, it didn't find it. So it said, I'll look in the superclass. The superclass's object, it has a toString, and its default toString gives me this stuff here. However, if I if I now re-uncomment it and I run it, it now executes this. Because it says, all right, you're a pet, and you've just tried to print it, and I'm going to look for the toString method. The toString method, I found it, and I'm going to execute it. Okay? Now let's do the next one. Now the next one, I probably won't get all the way through, but I'll have a running start on it. That was another class that had an array of, I think I called it animals, and then it had some stuff. All right, let's do that. Again, right-click, new Java class, my pets. Again, see, one of the things that the utility of these class diagrams is that when I have that design, I'm not sort of sitting here trying to create everything out of whole cloth. I have something I can go from, a design document, if you will. Okay, so now remember my pets. It had a single instance variable. Again, instance variable is always private. Its type was an array of pets and animals. Okay, now for this one, oops. I'm just going to kind of, I'm going to do this. Okay, so when I start, rather than kind of trying to do everything from the constructor, again, this is another way to do things, is that I'm going to do some of the stuff in the constructor, and then, but I'm going to rely on other things to do business. Now here's the, remember I talked about setters and getters, and if you're programmed in like C, C++, or other languages, you're kind of familiar with that concept. Scripting languages tend to be a little loosey about that. But here, what I'm going to do, I want setters and getters. That was part of the description, if you remember. So now NetBeans has this really cool thing. It's called refactor. So what I do is I right-click, and I say refactor, and the word is encapsulate fields. And if I say encapsulate fields, then what I can do is I can select my instance variables, and I'm going to put it as the last method. And I'm going to create setters and getters. Okay, create getter, create setter. The field is going to be private. The setter are going to be public. And when I say refactor, this is what it's created for me. So with a couple clicks, I automatically have these. And then finally, okay, so the final method is its toString. All right, so now the thing is that I'm going to have this array of animals, and so I want a string that's going to represent that. So let's see what that's going to look like. So let's. Okay, so I'm going to start with a string like this, and now I'm going to loop over all of my animals and then append append that animal to it. So because I don't know how many there are going to be. So this is where I do a for loop. Now, every Java array has a length. I think JavaScript has something similar. Do they call it size or length? I keep forgetting. Length, okay, yeah, so same thing. When you're iterating over an array, always have the upper bound be size of the array. And then now I'm going to append. So my animals, we append using the same conventions. \n is a new line. You're all familiar with that, right? So I'm going to put them each one on a new line, and we have about a minute, but if you will, let me just. I hate it when this happens. Let's get you back. Okay. There's actually a slightly more platform-independent way to do that, but I'm not going to bother you with that now. Okay, so mols I. Okay, so I'm just going to concatenate all that. And let's see, okay, can you indulge me for another minute just to kind of show what this is going to do? Or do you want to wait till next time? Okay, so let's test this out. So let's sort of see what that looks like. Again, just as before, and I'm gonna kind of do this similar thing. Where I define these and instantiate it separately, just to emphasize the fact that they're different. At some point, I'll skip that. And let's see what we get just by doing nothing. Okay, so by doing nothing, I just, remember I started with this string and then looped over this, but the loop didn't go anywhere because I instantiated the array with a length 0. So now I need to use my, I need to define an array. So let's give it like 3. All right. So here's, and then you've all done stuff like this before. And let's have our old friend Fluffy the pit bull. And how about actually, let's just to kind of show you. Okay, let's put him in 2, and now I'm going to use the setter method, set animals, and I pass it that array. Okay, so now when I print it. Okay, now notice I put 1 in 0 and 1 in 2, and I left 1 empty, just to show you what it's going to look like. Okay, so this first one, let me comment at that. right? The first one was the empty one before you put anything in. And so now my pets consist of, okay, there's Fluffy and there's George, but then the second one I didn't put anything in, so null. Remember we said that in an array, it gets a default value if you don't give it anything. And so the default value for objects is null. That's kind of what this shows. And so we generally don't want to leave it like that, so let's, okay, so now, okay, so you see how that, okay, what's happened? Here, we put together a number of different concepts. We've declared here a variable of type myPets, we called it myPets lowercase. Here I've instantiated it. In this case, I don't require anything in the constructor, so I'm fine here. But if I don't put anything in, then there's nothing there. So I have to actually put something there. In order to put something there, what does it need? It needs an array of pets. So I need to create an array of pets. Here I've defined an array of pets, instantiated to be of length 3. Now, again, notice that this is especially important for object arrays. It's not enough to just say this. I have to instantiate each individual element. And again, unlike JavaScript, okay, okay, so now notice the compiler doesn't pick this up. But what's going to happen? Yeah, we're going to get an error of some kind. Now, unfortunately, not a compiler error, because the compiler the compiler is smart enough to figure out syntax, but it's not smart enough to realize that you instantiated this with only 3 and tried to give it 4 elements. And this is where this zero-based indexing is so stupid, because give me the third element of your array. Well, that should be length 3, right? So here I've actually done it, and then when I run it, I'm going to get an array index out of bounds exception, and it even tells me what it is. Okay, so this is an error there. Now let's get it running there. All right, so thanks for indulging me with the extra time. I will